How do you feel when a stranger knocks on your door? Are you somewhat apprehensive? When that person immediately launches into a pitch, no matter what reason they have for being there, is not your first thought, how do I get out of this? What if that same person appeared at your doorstep every few months? In the midst of our busy lives, is any time ever a good time for a stranger to call uninvited? Now, imagine yourself the one knocking on the door. How would you feel? Nervous? Anxious? Likely it's a work that you would not choose to do. You never know who might answer, if indeed anyone answers at all. In fact, people you encounter might be rather rude at times, and might say things that stab you and haunt you for weeks and months. If you do go door to door, let me ask you, do you feel it is truly effective? Do you sometimes feel like you are bothering people? How often do you hope, even pray, that no one answers the door? Some might say, well, Christ commanded Christians to do this work. That's the identifying mark of his true followers. And some truly feel that way. They view the amount of time they spend in this work as a gauge of spirituality. Spiritually strong people, in this view, spend many hours in this, while spiritually weak persons, according to them, spend little or no time. Those so-called weak individuals then become, in essence, doomed. Some of these people feel caught between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, they hate the door-to-door work because it can be a cause of great anxiety and pain with little to show for the effort. On the other hand, they feel if they don't do it, they will ultimately be the target of God's wrath. At the very least, they feel like they cannot have a real relationship with God unless they do this work. But is this truly a work Christians are commanded to engage in? Can a person's righteousness or spirituality be measured by the amount of time they engage in this activity? Well, first, we must examine some of the proof texts that are used to justify going door to door and take a deeper look at them. It really boils down to two proof texts. The first is at Acts chapter 5, verse 42. And every day in the temple and from house to house, they did not cease teaching and preaching that Christ is Jesus. And Acts 20:20. I did not shrink from declaring to you anything that was profitable and teaching you in public and from house to house. In these two verses, can we conclude that going house to house was a hallmark activity for all first-century Christians? First, we should ask ourselves, even if some engaged in this work, do these verses constitute a command for all Christians to do so? If so, where do you see that command to preach in this manner in these texts? If we are being honest, no, these verses do not constitute a command. Some, however, might say, well, first-century Christians set an example for us to follow, and in that manner we can see that it is imperative to go house to house. Even so, does the phrase translated here as house to house mean what we think it does? How would we be able to tell? If we examine the Greek phrase rendered house to house at Acts 5:42 and 20:20, we find the phrase kata oikos. It means literally according to houses or according to homes. Does this mean that early Christians preached from house to house or home to home, in the sense that we think of today as door to door? Well, notice Acts chapter 2, verse 46. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts. If we examine the Greek in this verse, the phrase in their homes is actually kata oikos, or according to houses, or according to homes. Now, if we're to be consistent in our understanding of the phrase according to houses to mean house to house, as in door to door, at Acts chapter 5 verse 42 and Acts 20:20, we would have to apply the same meaning to Acts chapter 2 verse 46. That would mean rendering this verse like the others and saying that they were breaking bread from house to house. Of course, it does not stand to reason that early Christians went door to door breaking bread with just anybody who answered. That is why all translations render katai oikos, or according to houses, in this verse, in their homes, rather than house to house. Notice in this verse, the contrast is given between public attendance at the temple and breaking bread in private homes. A public activity is contrasted with a private one. What homes did they meet in? Here the context shows that it was a gathering of believers rather than strangers or unbelievers. Logically, this would inform our understanding then of Acts 5:42 and Acts 20:20. If a translation is to be truly literal and consistent in its rendering, then the phrase kata oikos, according to Holmes, would likewise be rendered homes, and many translations do just that. For instance, the very literal Rotherham's Emphasized Bible renders Acts chapter 5 verse 42, and every day in the temple and at home they ceased not to be teaching and telling the good news as to the anointed Jesus. And Acts 20:20 is rendered, in what manner I in no wise shrank from announcing unto you anything that was profitable, and teaching you publicly and in your homes. Notice again the same contrast between public and private activity. Teaching in public places and teaching in private homes. Therefore, this phrase, kata oikos, or according to houses, seems to be best understood in these cases not as house to house, in the sense of going door to door, making cold calls on strangers at their homes, but rather private homes, that is, the homes of believers. Another point to be brought up in these verses in Acts 5:42, when it says, they ceased not to be teaching. Who is they?